Well, in case you've been in a coma for the last few months, there's positives and negatives. On the plus side, you would have missed Adipurush and the Marvels, but you would have also missed this.
At 3:30 GMT, Hamas started its military operation, firing thousands of rockets into Israel.
Rockets still being fired?
Rockets are still being fired very intensely from the Gaza Strip. We've also seen more and more videos and pictures come from the Palestinian fighters that have infiltrated into the Israeli towns.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה. לא במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה.
Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the second phase of Israel's war against Hamas has begun.
As Israeli forces begin ground operations inside Gaza, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the goal is to destroy the Hamas military and governing capabilities and bring the hostages home.
It's obviously a completely horrific situation, but one of the more surprising and interesting aspects of this situation has been the amount of support that Israel has received from ordinary Indians. It's been a bit of a surprise to many Indians and especially many Westerners that at a time when the entire Muslim world and the entire liberal infrastructure is solidly behind Hamas and Palestine, why are so many Indians overwhelmingly supporting Israel? So to set the stage and give context of why Indians are supporting Israel, let's talk about what happened. The current conflict started on October 7th on the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. Hamas fired thousands of rockets into Israeli territory, and over 1,000 Hamas terrorists were able to invade Israel through land, air, and water, and were able to massacre close to 1,500 Israelis.
Hundreds of militants entered southern Israel on motorbikes and cars. Hamas also conducted an amphibious landing near Zikim. On October 10th, the Israeli military claimed that roughly 1,500 Hamas fighters were killed during the incursion into Israel, which shows the scale of the incursion.
It is one of the worst terror attacks that Israel has ever suffered. It was a big shock for many Israelis because just 10 days before the attack, Israel had made an agreement with Gaza about allowing more Palestinians to come and work in Israel.
Merely 10 days before the start of this war, Israel reached an agreement with Hamas through intermediaries, reopening the border crossing and allowing Gazan laborers to work in Israel.
Along with 1,500 Israelis being massacred, over 200 Israelis have also been taken hostage. And more than a month has passed and the hostages have still not been released. The attacks were so cruel, so brutal, that even babies and children were not spared.
Hundreds of civilians, including children, were killed indiscriminately in Sderot, Ashkelon, near Oz, Be'eri, Kfar Aza, Netiv HaAsara, Ofakim, and other areas near the Gaza Strip.
Hamas very clearly doesn't seem to be interested in any form of a political or peaceful solution.
وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك احنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة انه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة لأنه احنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات.
كل الأراضي الفلسطينية يعني زوال إسرائيل؟
طبعا وجود إسرائيل غير منطقي.
Well, in a situation like this, it probably seems pretty natural to offer support to Israel, who have suffered one of the worst terror attacks in their entire history. However, what's been surprising is that obviously most of the Muslim world and a very large part of the liberal establishment in Western countries has been pretty staunchly pro-Palestine and anti-Israel. And in that context, a lot of people are very surprised that common Indians are offering a lot of support to Israel. Well, to understand why common Indians sort of look up to Israel and are offering their support to Israel, let's try to understand the Israel-Palestine situation so we can try to have at least some semblance of a nuanced understanding of the situation. The land that we know today as Israel is considered to be the ancient homeland of the Jews.
We came here, the Jewish people came here with Abraham. They came here about 3,500 years ago. And this has been our land, the one we've been attached to, for 3,500 years. Jerusalem, our capital, 3,000 years. Basically survived here, thrived here, struggled here for about 2,000 years of these 3,500 years.
But after the Arab-Muslim conquest of the area of Israel, the Jews were summarily driven out of the land. Since then, the Jewish diaspora across the world has always dreamt of one day returning to their ancient homeland and establishing their nation there again. Well, jumping to the 19th century, the area of Israel was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. Then, Britain defeated the Ottoman Empire and took control of Israel. In the 20th century, the Jews had already gone through many centuries of persecution in Europe, and the demands to find a permanent homeland for the Jewish people in the Israel area had intensified. Under that pressure, in 1917, Britain promised the Jewish people under the Balfour Declaration that it would facilitate Jewish immigration to Israel.
In 1917, the British government, hoping to gain the support of Jewish people, issued the Balfour Declaration, promising, quote, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. A bold promise considering that Palestine was still technically Ottoman as they hadn't yet lost World War I.
Between the 1920s and the 1940s, the number of Jews arriving to the Israel area grew, with many fleeing from persecution in Europe, especially from the Nazis during World War II. At this point, you can understand the Arab unhappiness with the Jews arriving in the Israel area because in a way, they were paying for the crimes of the Europeans. But to be fair, many Israelis would make the argument that around 35 to 50% of the Israeli Jewish population today is made up of Jews who left or were driven out of Arab and Muslim countries. For example, the Mizrahi or Sephardi Jews. So it's not like the Arab countries were happy to coexist with the Jews either. The history of Arab and Muslim anti-Semitism is about as long as the history of European anti-Semitism. So as you can see, the Jews weren't really left with much of a choice. They couldn't live in Europe. They couldn't live in Muslim countries. The only option that they had was to either jump into the sea or try to settle wherever they were able to. The Arabs living in the area where the Jewish people were immigrating were obviously not happy about this, which culminated in the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine. In 1947, after the horrors of the Holocaust and what the Jewish people had to go through, the UN voted for the area where Israel was to be split into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem becoming an international city. That plan was accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by the Arab side and never implemented. And as is British tradition, they came and they fucked an area up. And when they realized that they couldn't unfuck that area, they decided to pack their bags and leave. Alright lads, see you later. Where are you going? Oh, we're going to go home now. What? You're also responsible for this problem. You have to fix this. Well, we don't know how. I don't care if you don't know how. Help us fix this problem. Oh my god, look! Fresh hummus. Ooh, where? Go, run. Damn it! Hey, come back! And the Arabs weren't content with a political solution to this problem. They didn't want the Jews to be removed and settled somewhere else. They wanted the annihilation of the Jews. This was made very clear by Azam Pasha, Secretary General of the Arab League. He said it will be a war of annihilation. It will be a momentous massacre in history that will be talked about like the massacres of the Mongols or the Crusades. This doesn't sound like a tenable solution. This sounds more like a final solution. Israel won that war, but again in the 1950s, Israel was frequently attacked by Palestinian Fedayeen, nearly always against civilians. And in case you don't know what a Fedayeen is, in India they're called headmasters' sons, biryani lovers, religious scholars, and loving father and husbands. Another war was fought against Jews by the Arab Muslim states in 1956. This war ended with Israel capturing the Sinai Peninsula with the help of Britain and France.
Every side of the conflict was over quickly, with Israel, France, and the UK achieving their objectives.
Later, a ceasefire was announced and Israel vacated the Sinai Peninsula.
France and Israel soon after signed a ceasefire. British and French forces left Egypt in late November, and Israel didn't withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula until March of the next year.
Then came the third war, also called the Six-Day War.
In 1967, after Egyptian tank divisions moved into Sinai in preparation for battle, Israel launched a surprise preemptive airstrike on Egyptian airfields, crippling Egypt's air force. Israelis secured a stunning victory in only 6 days. In what began as a defensive war, Israel conquered the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights, leaving the Jewish state with territory 3 times its previous size.
After this came the Yom Kippur War, where the Arab nations attacked Israel on the Jewish festival of Yom Kippur.
At 2 p.m. Yom Kippur afternoon, Egypt and Syria launched airstrikes and artillery barrages against Israel. Simultaneously, the Egyptians rapidly launched ferries and laid bridges across the Suez Canal. 70,000 Egyptian troops and over 2,000 tanks crossed the canal, where they came face to face with Israel's Bar-Lev line.
Finally, after all these wars, the Camp David Accords were signed, under which Israel gave up the Sinai Peninsula, which was a great gesture for peace in exchange for renegotiation by Egypt.
The document stipulated that Israel give the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. In exchange, Egypt would give Israel permission to use the Suez Canal for trade.
Israel also signed the Oslo Accords, which gave West Bank to the Palestinian authorities.
The West Bank was to be divided into 3 areas. One under Palestinian control, one where Palestinians had civilian control and Israelis controlled security, and one area that would be totally controlled by Israel.
However, again, a majority of Palestinians did not accept the accords, nor did many terror groups. So the situation was quite rife for a terror group to take advantage of popular sentiment against Israel and dethrone the Palestinian Liberation Organization as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian desires. In 1987, after all the wars that were fought against Israel, after Israel had won all those wars handily, the first Intifada happened against Israel, which was sort of a general riot against Jews. After that Intifada, in 1987, Hamas was founded by Palestinian Imam Ahmad Yassin. It opposed the Oslo Accords, it refused to recognize Israel, and it refused the two-state solution. Hamas published its charter in 1988, in which it announced its goals as raising the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine, the destruction of Israel, and said that Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. Despite having the destruction of Israel as a fundamental aspect of its charter, Hamas won the 2006 Palestinian legislative election, gaining a majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council, and took control of the Gaza Strip from Fatah following a civil war in 2007. This is what Israel constantly points to, that Hamas, a terrorist organization whose clear aim is to destroy the country of Israel and kill every Jew, enjoys popular support among the Palestinian people. And even now, a proposal in the US General Assembly was presented by Jordan on behalf of the Arab League, called for a humanitarian truce once Israel started invading Gaza and attacking Hamas after Hamas's terror attack on 7th October. The resolution passed with 120 in favor, but India abstained from voting, saying it did not include explicit condemnation of the October 7th terror attacks in Israel. And this explains India's position on the Israel-Palestine situation quite well. Right now, Hamas hasn't even released the over 200 hostages that it has taken. Asking for a ceasefire right now is like getting entry into the safe house in Grand Theft Auto when you have 4 stars and the police is chasing you with tanks and helicopters. There was already a ceasefire in place before 7th of October. That ceasefire was broken by Hamas. India actually has one of the more mature stances on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Our policy in this regard has been long-standing and consistent. India has always advocated the resumption of direct negotiations towards establishing a sovereign, independent and viable state of Palestine, living within secure and recognized borders, side by side, at peace with Israel. And I think that position remains the same. On the issue of how we see Hamas, for example, as you're aware, the designation of a terrorist organization under Indian laws is a legal matter. I think we've been very clear that we see this as a terrorist attack. There is an universal obligation, I think, to observe international humanitarian law. There is also a global responsibility to fight the menace of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations.
India supports the two-state solution. It believes that there should be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. India has even provided humanitarian aid to Gaza. What India does not support is terror attacks by the terrorist organization that is Hamas. So that is India's stand. However, the common Indians have pretty strongly come in favor of Israel online.
I feel extremely happy that we in India have now a mass support for Israel.
Prominent actresses have shown support, social media influencers have shown support, Twitter, Facebook and other kinds of social media are rife with examples of Indians supporting Israel. People in India were supporting Israel during a cricket match. Some organized a pro-Israel rally. Even Indians in Canada were supporting Israel. Indian hackers even hacked pro-Palestinian websites. And it's interesting because if you look at the narrative battle, the Jews are severely outnumbered. There are about 15 million Jews on planet Earth, whereas the Muslim world is 2 billion strong, almost completely united against Israel, and they are also being supported by hundreds of thousands of liberal politicians, universities, student bodies and media in Western countries. But millions of Indians online have done a decent job in balancing the odds. So much so that the media has to come out and attack these Indians for supporting Israel.
I'd say that it is less pro-Israeli and more anti-Palestinian. It is more anti-Muslim. India has a disinformation problem. It also has an Islamophobia problem. When you mix the two up, this kind of becomes the perfect opportunity to show off your Islamophobia by way of extending support to Israel.
This is how hate and misinformation works. You keep repeating something again and again and again, that, there is Islamic terror and how Israel is trying to protect itself. And then there is a Muslim threat in India and how Hindus are trying to protect themselves. And if you keep repeating this, there comes a time when people who are consuming this or who may be misinformed, when they see that Muslims are treated with a lot of violence, they can, one, justify it, or two, just say that they deserve it. So what happens is that you take away how a normal human being would react to someone who's facing violence. And this is essentially what hate and misinformation achieves.
So that brings us to the question, why do Indians support Israel? Indians, and specifically Hindus, have been subject of hatred from Abrahamic cultures like Christianity and Islam that is sanctioned by the religious books of these respective cultures.
He didn't hate me because of anything I did. He hated me because of what I am.
And the same applies to the Jews as well. You can see these anti-Semitic verses from Islamic scriptures, while here are some anti-polytheist verses from Islamic scriptures. When the 4 forbidden months are over, wherever you encounter the idolaters, kill them, seize them, besiege them, wait for them at every lookout post, but if they turn to God, maintain the prayer, and pay the prescribed alms, let them go on their way, for God is most forgiving and merciful. Those who disbelieve among the people of the book and the idolaters will have the fire of hell there to remain. They are the worst of creation. Believers who ascribe partners to God, meaning polytheists, are truly unclean. Do not let them come near the sacred mosque. If you are afraid, you may become poor. Similarly, Christian scriptures have anti-Semitic passages as well. Particularly a verse that has caused more Jewish suffering than any other in the Christian Testament is the uniquely Matthean cry attributed to the people as a whole. His blood be on us and on our children. This verse is often read implying that all Jews of Jesus' time and forever afterward accept the responsibility and blame for Jesus' death. In Christian Europe, many Jewish pogroms were initiated by church members and inflamed by sermons. In short, both the Hindus and the Jews were hated not for something that they did, but simply for who they were. Secondly, both India and Israel have been subject of Islamist terror attacks. India has faced countless terror attacks, notable being the 1993 Mumbai bombings, the Pulwama attack in 2019, the 1996 Lajpat Nagar bomb blast, the Akshardham temple attack, the 2001 parliament attack, the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks.
Of course, the problems in Kashmir. Then you had the series of bomb blasts every year in Mumbai in your train system. Something happening, then of course 26/11. Every other Diwali you would have a bomb blast in either Lajpat Nagar or Sarojini Nagar and so on.
Similarly, Israel too has faced countless terror attacks where innocent civilians were targeted. In the first Intifada, around 200 Israelis were killed by Palestinians. During the second Intifada, there were many Israeli civilian casualties.
Picturing the second Intifada, which began in the year 2000, in which over 1,100 Israelis were murdered, the majority of whom were civilians. Of the second Intifada until the completion of the first continuous segment of the barrier in July 2003, there were 73 suicide bombings that claimed almost 300 Israeli civilian lives.
And the bloodlust of the masses were exemplified by this.
Another tragic event occurred 12 days later. 2 Israeli Defense Force reservists accidentally entered the city of Ramallah. Palestinian police stopped them and took them to a police station. Now, the atmosphere in the city was tense at that time, as thousands had just attended the funeral of a 17-year-old killed in clashes with Israeli troops. An angry mob numbering more than 1,000 assembled in front of the police station, demanding the death of the Israelis. It wasn't long before they stormed the building and murdered the 2 soldiers.
It is in this backdrop that India looks up to Israel. India looks up to Israel in how to deal with a rabid terrorist neighbor. India looks up to Israel in the sense that Israel has defeated enemies that are much bigger and stronger than it. Indians look up to Israel in the fact that Israel will find and kill terrorists around the world with no compunction. India and Israel are both surrounded by hostile enemies, but the field in which we have to learn from Israel is that Israel makes absolutely no compromises when it comes to national security. On the contrary, there have been times in Indian history when India has been attacked and there has been no response from the government. Remember, after the 26/11 attacks, one of the worst terror attacks in India's history, it was also very clear that the terror attacks had originated from Pakistan and the terrorists who carried out the attacks were Pakistanis. But what did India do? Nothing. In fact, politicians associated with the ruling party at that time were busy blaming the RSS for the terror attack, despite having overwhelming proof to the contrary. And this is why many Indians are jealous almost of Israel's policy, that when they get hit, Israel responds in kind. Thirdly, Indians also see the inherent hypocrisy of many liberal intellectuals and media in how they support extremists. We've seen many examples about how Islamic terror or Islamic extremism is not shown as terror or extremism. In fact, the people who have these opinions, who have these beliefs, are painted as victims by many sections of the media, many sections of the political class and the intellectual class. Indians also see this happening with Israel, that the people that carried out the attacks are simply being painted as victims. There are journalists that are saying that only the Israelis are to blame. There are intellectuals that are saying that decolonization means the killing of innocent babies and the sexual assault of women. They see the same biased Indian journalists supporting Hamas instead of Israel. They see the communists and Islamists in Kerala take out a rally in support of Palestine, except that instead of the Palestinian flag, they are carrying the Italian flags. Indians are well aware of this kind of hypocrisy. They've seen this hypocrisy from the same class when it comes to Kashmir, Islamic extremism, Pakistani or domestic terrorism, Islamic patriarchy, the CAA, the Ram Mandir, and many other instances. Alright, repeat after me. Wrist, terrorist, freedom fighter. What the f? And finally, the clarity of the Israeli state is crystal clear. Take the CAA for example. The government was able to pass the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act in 2019, which allows Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, Christians from Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh to come to India and seek citizenship. But the cutoff point for that is only 2014, and the rules of the CAA have still not been notified 4 years down the line. Contrast that to Israel, where according to the law of return, all non-Israeli Jews and converts to Judaism are entitled to settle in Israel and receive full Israeli citizenship. That is a civilizational conviction that India lacks. Israel provides equal rights to all citizens. However, Israel clearly treats Judaism as first among equals. It's the same treatment that Indians want to give to the Hindu civilization. Many Hindu nationalists want that all Indians should have the exact same rights. However, the Indian civilization should be given the first among equals treatment, which means Hindus, Sikhs and Buddhists should get the first right of immigrating and settling in India if they are being persecuted in other countries. Because this is the only country that the Dharmic civilization has. They don't have another country. Many Indians are jealous that even the leftist parties of Israel do not compromise when it comes to national security. Right now, Israel is fighting Hamas tooth and nail, and all opposition leaders have given their full support to the government. In fact, some opposition leaders are even fighting together with the IDF. But in India, you have politicians like Rahul Gandhi who go overseas and ask for foreign interference in their own country. So ultimately, many Indians see Israel as a shining light in an area where religious, cultural, political and social freedom, education, science, economic development don't seem to be the highest priority. Today, India is one of Israel's largest trading partners, one of its biggest arms buyers, one of its most reliable allies and one of its most vocal supporters. Views of India are also mostly positive in Israel, where 71% say that they have a favorable view of India. Today, India and Israel are cooperating in trade, science, technology, defense and a lot more. Even though Indians and India have a very nuanced view of the situation. They support the two-state solution. They support rights for the Palestinian people. But there are many similarities between what the Israelis face and what the Indians have been facing over many decades, which is why Indians naturally gravitate to support Israel, because they empathize with them and they feel like India can learn many lessons from how Israel handles its problems. And I want to ask you, why do you think many Indians support Israel? Let me know in the comment section down below. I know I haven't been very consistent on this channel, but I'm going to try and make some interesting explainer videos for you guys in English as well to reach a wider audience, hopefully a non-Indian audience as well, so that as India grows, a non-Indian audience can also start to understand the Indian point of view. So if you'd like me to make more videos, let me know in the comment section down below. Like, share, subscribe, and I will see you for the next episode. Until then, see you next time. Take care. Sakya Pranam.